So we are looking into the next part, which is nothing but essential elements of valid contract as per Act. As per Act, there has to be agreement, that is offer plus, and then there has to be, so basically as per the Act, following are the essential elements. There has to be two parties. Sorry, as per the Act, there has to be agreement, there should be free consent, competency of parties, lawful consideration, legal object, and not expressly declared to be void. Out of which, in the previous video, part 2, we saw about two parties: intention to create legal obligation, formality, certainty of meaning, possibility of performance. And then as per the Act, we saw about offer and acceptance, free consent, and capacity of parties. So in the capacity of parties, there are mainly two things. So capacity of parties are mainly two things that we will have to consider. One being, so one is about the age. They should have attained the age of majority. And the other one is a person will have to be of sound mind. See, regarding age, majority meaning person should have attained at least 18 years of age for them to validly enter into a contract. So that's one thing. And sound mind meaning person who, at the time of entering into contract, will have to understand the consequences. At the time of contract, the person will have to understand the consequences of entering into the contract. So again, so in this case, regarding sound mind, a person who's of unsound mind, but occasionally when he's of sound mind, can still enter into a contract. And similarly, a person who's of unsound mind, when he's of sound mind, can enter into a contract. That's one thing. And apart from that, a person who's of sound mind but occasionally becomes unsound mind, at that point of time cannot enter into a contract. And then other disqualified persons would include minors, lunatics meaning unsound mind person, intoxicated person meaning person under the influence of drug or alcohol, who cannot really understand the consequences of entering into contract, should not enter into contract. So what do you mean by consideration? Consideration means something of value which is exchanged. Quid pro quo, that is something for something, which is something in written. So quid pro quo is nothing but something in written. Lawful consideration and lawful object. The consideration that you are receiving has to be lawful. And object, the purpose, object meaning purpose of entering into contract has to be lawful. For example, A enters into a contract with B to kill, to murder C. Now to murder C, which is not a lawful object, it's illegal. So in this case, object is illegal. Let's take another example where B enters into contract with C to sell his house for drugs in exchange of drugs. Now receiving drugs is not a lawful consideration, it's illegal consideration, and hence this type of contract is not a valid one. So what do you mean by lawful consideration and lawful object? It means that it should not be. So when the object or consideration is not lawful, when it's prohibited by law, when it defeats the provisions of law, when it's fraudulent or causes injury to another, or when it's deemed as immoral or against public policy. And contract should not be expressly declared to be void. What is meant by this? So it must not fall under any of the categories of illegal or void agreements. Let's take for example a contract. There's a contract which is impossible to be performed. Now in that case, it automatically becomes, now there's a contract which is again impossible to perform, so it automatically becomes, if there's a contract and it's impossible to perform, automatically it becomes a void agreement. It's not valid in the first place. Now certain types of agreements which are void, those are not a valid agreement and it's not a valid contract. So to form a valid contract, there must be an agreement resulting from a genuine offer and acceptance, free consent, competent parties, lawful consideration and object, and agreement must not be void or illegal. So now next part is about the types of contracts. So based on validity or enforceability, contracts can be valid contract, can be void contract, can be voidable, can be illegal, can be unenforceable. So let's see in detail each of these. Then in the base of formation, the contracts can be express contract, it can be implied contract, it can be quasi, or it can be e-contract. Based on performance, it can be executed or executory. Executory can again be unilateral or bilateral. So let's see each of these contract types in detail. So based on validity, it can be valid. So valid contract is one wherein it has all the essential elements of a valid contract. It's binding and it's enforceable by law, has all the essential elements. It's an agreement which is legally enforceable. For example, A asks B if he wants to buy his bike for 50,000 and B agrees. So there's an offer, there's an acceptance for a consideration, and it's legally enforceable. So in this case, it constitutes a valid contract. It's an enforceable agreement. So once the agreement becomes enforceable, it becomes a contract automatically. So next is about void contract. So void contract is one which, as we know, is an invalid contract. It ceases to be enforceable by law. So what do you mean by void contract? Void contract is one which is not enforceable, not legally enforceable, and that's a void contract. For example, an agreement to do something impossible, like flying unaided, is void from the very beginning. Void from the very beginning meaning, so right from the very start, we know that this contract is a void contract because anyways it's impossible of being performed. So that's also referred to as void ab initio. So initio, as the name suggests, from the very initial stage, that is from the very beginning, this is a void contract. Voidable contract. Now what do you mean by voidable contract? A contract which is valid, which was valid in the beginning, but then it becomes voidable due to change in circumstance. That's called as voidable contract. Enforceable at the option of one or more parties, but not at the option of others. Like for example, if at all consent was obtained through coercion, undue influence, or misrepresentation of fraud. Okay, let's see about this void and voidable contract. So void contract is generally void since the very beginning. It's void ab initio. So voidable contract is initially it was valid, later on due to any of the circumstance, maybe due to coercion or undue influence, it becomes voidable. Now what do you mean by this? Let's take for example, A is coercing B through coercion. He's selling goods, selling the vehicle worth 1 lakh to B. Now in this case it's voidable. What do you mean by voidable? Or maybe initially, let's take for example, initially A has agreed with B to sell goods worth 10,000. So in this case, for example, A is entering into a contract to sell goods worth 10,000 to B. Later on, through coercion, he is coercing B to pay 15,000. Now in this case, it becomes a voidable contract. Initially it was valid, but now it becomes voidable. Why? Because this is caused due to coercion. So voidable meaning it can be made void at the option of, it's voidable at the option of affected party. At the option of affected party. So in this case, A is coercing B. So in this case, B is the affected party. So at the option of B, it is voidable. So what B can do is either B can make this a void contract or he can make it a valid contract. What do you mean by this? So for example, if B chooses to make this contract void, in that case, B will make this contract void, and then automatically all this agreement will get cancelled. So he has to return the vehicle and then he can get back this 15,000 if he has paid the same. Now if he chooses to make this contract a valid one, in that case it will continue as such, and he has to pay that 15,000 to A and get the vehicle. So it's voidable at the option of affected party, but not at the option of others. That is, this cannot be made void or valid at the option of A, but it can be made void or valid at the option of B, since B is affected party over here. And what do you mean by illegal contract? Illegal contract is one wherein it's forbidden by law, one that is forbidden by law or defeats the provision of law. And as we know, illegal contract is void ab initio. It's void from the very beginning. Those contracts which are illegal are void from the very beginning and it cannot be enforced. For example, an agreement to sell illegal drugs is an illegal contract. Now there's one distinction that we will have to see between illegal and void contracts. So what is the distinction between illegal and void contracts? See, a contract may be void. That is kind of invalid contract, right? One which is, what do you mean by void? Void contract is one which is not legally enforceable. See, void contract, a contract can be void due to any of the reasons. Because it's illegal, due to that it may be void. Or because it is impossible of being performed. So because of that reason also it can be void. Or maybe because there's no certainty of meaning. The meaning is uncertain or vague. In that case also, a contract is void from the very beginning. It's void. Basically, it's kind of an an invalid contract. That is not legally enforceable. Now, are illegal contracts void? Obviously, yes. If it's illegal, then it's obviously a void contract. So from this, what do we get to understand? Are all void contracts illegal? No, it can be because of any other reason as well. So all illegal contracts are void contracts, obviously, but all void contracts are not illegal because it can be due to any other reason as well. So that's something that we'll have to understand. Next thing being unenforceable contract. What do you mean by unenforceable contracts? Unenforceable contract is one wherein it cannot be enforced. One that cannot be enforced. As the name suggests, it's unenforceable. It could not be enforced because of technical defects. For example, lack of written form or barred by limitation, etc. Now, lack of written form. Now, as we already saw, an agreement contract can be in written format or can be in oral format as well. But in certain cases, it will have to be in written. Like for example, insurance. Insurance contract or immovable property registration contract. So in that case, if at all it's invalid, if at all it's not in written format, if it's in oral, then in that case it will be invalid. For example, certain contracts are required to be in written format, but if it's in oral format, then in that case obviously it's not enforceable. And certain contracts are maybe barred by limitation. Like for example, barred by limitation meaning, generally as per the Limitation Act, this Limitation Act of 1963, as per which debts, if you give any debt and if you recover the same, it has to be done within a period of 3 years of issuing the debt. If you don't if you're not recovering the debt within a period of 3 years, then after 3 years it becomes a time barred debt. A time barred debt is one. So meanwhile, in these 3 years, if at all there's a contract and if they're not paying the amount as per the contract, you will be able to enforce the same in the court of law, meaning you will be able to file a suit in a court of law. It's legally enforceable. Whereas once 3 years has crossed, after that it becomes a time barred debt, meaning after that it's not legally enforceable. And after that, there may be a question that whether we'll be able to recover the debt after 3 years, it completely depends. So if at all the borrower agrees to pay the amount, then yes, we can recover. But otherwise, we will not be able to recover since it's again not legally enforceable. So next we have the difference between void and voidable contracts. Now what do you mean by a void contract? Void contract is one which is not legally enforceable. That is ceases means stops to be enforceable by law. It ceases to be enforceable by law. What do you mean by voidable contract? Voidable contract is one which is enforceable. That is, what do you mean? What is enforceable? Voidable contract may be made void or it can be made valid at the option of affected party. Right? So at the option of affected party, it can be made void or it can be made valid. So it is enforceable. That is, if the affected party chooses to continue with that contract as a valid contract, it's enforceable at the option of one or more parties. One or more parties here meaning affected party. Now what do you mean by, and then enforceability? Void contract is something that you cannot enforce at all. It's not legally enforceable. Voidable contract is one which is enforceable only at the option of aggrieved party. What do you mean by this? Aggrieved meaning affected party. So it's enforceable only at the option of aggrieved party, meaning if the affected party chooses to make it a valid contract, then it's enforceable. Otherwise, it's not enforceable. Cause is nothing but reason. So it can be void due to change in law or due to any other circumstance. Whereas voidable, it becomes voidable if consent was not free. So generally, when does a contract become a voidable contract? So contract becomes a voidable contract when there is no free consent. What do you mean by the term when there is no free consent? There is said to be no free consent when it's caused due to coercion or misrepresentation, undue influence, fraud or mistake. And void contract performance, it can never be performed. Void contract can never be performed. So void contract is something that you can never perform. Able to enter into contract. So void contract is something that you cannot perform. Here voidable contract, aggrieved party, affected party can choose to perform or rescind. Rescind meaning to cancel, to make to make it a void contract. So here it's up to the aggrieved affected party. Aggrieved party or affected party can make that a valid contract or can make that a void contract. Void contracts, no legal remedy is available. Whereas in case of voidable contract, there's a right to resign. Now if at all a party is affected, in that case he can resign. He can choose to resign or cancel the contract within a reasonable point of time. Otherwise it will become valid contract, and then he will have to, in that example we saw, right, he will have to pay the amount of the vehicle and get the vehicle. Though there was no free consent, it was caused due to coercion. He has to resign or cancel the contract within a specified period of time. Otherwise, it becomes a valid contract. What is the distinction between void and illegal? So, void agreement is not necessarily illegal, because void can be because of other reasons as well, right? So, it can be because of impossibility of performance or uncertainty of meaning as well. Whereas illegal agreement are always illegal. Void is not forbidden by law. It can be due to other reasons as well. Illegal is always forbidden by law. Void agreement, parties are not liable for punishment over here. Illegal agreement, they may face penalties, legal penalties. Void agreement may have valid collateral agreements. Here collateral meaning additional agreements. So in addition to the main agreement, there may be some other additional agreement as well. In case of void, that may be valid. In case of illegal, an illegal agreement and branch of that illegal agreement, if there is any collateral agreement, that also becomes void. Next thing being types of contracts on the basis of formation. So on the basis of validity, we saw there are 5 types of agreement: valid, void, voidable, illegal, and unenforceable. So based on formation, there can be 4 types of contract. First one being express contract. So express contract is one where the terms are clearly stated, where it's expressly stated in writing or oral. So where the terms are expressly stated in writing or oral. Form of communication. Legal basis. If a proposal or acceptance is made in words, it is considered an express contract. Like take for example, A tells B over phone that he offers to sell his house for 20 lakhs. He's expressly stating the terms, and B replies that he accepts the offer. This is an express contract, wherein they expressly stating the terms and the other party is accepting the same. Implied contracts. Implied contract, as the name suggests, is implied through actions or conduct of the other party. It's not expressly stated in written or oral format. Arises from the actions or conduct of parties rather than from explicit words. So proposals or acceptance are made otherwise than in words. For example, if at all, we go to a restaurant and we order food. So we are not going and saying the hotel owner or maybe the person who serves the meal that we will be paying for the food that we are ordering. There is no formal agreement over here, but still it's implied through our actions that we will be paying for the meal. For example, if we use a public weighing machine, then it automatically means that we will be dropping the coin as well inside the machine. And if at all we board a bus, it implicitly means that we will be paying for the same. We will be paying for their services. Tacit contract. Tacit contract is also a subset of the implied contract. It's also a type of implied contract. These are also called a silent contract. Again, this is something that is expressed without any spoken or written words. It's implied through actions, through conduct of parties. Take for example, we withdraw cash from ATM. It constitutes a tacit contract between bank and customer, as both parties understand the transaction without any explicit agreement. We don't go and then tell anyone over there that we are withdrawing cash. When we withdrawing cash, automatically it means that there's some sort of agreement between bank and customer, though there's no formal or the next type of contract is quasi-contract. Quasi-contract means some contract where there's no actual formal contract, but law imposes that contract. Now, what do you mean by that? One best example is obligation of finder of lawsuits. There are no actual contract, but they are legal constructs imposed by law to ensure fairness and justice. For example, best example is obligation of finder of lawsuits. Now, take for example, we find something, maybe a diamond or maybe cash worth 1 lakh of a person or some other person. What is our obligation in that case? As per law, it's a responsibility to find the owner and to give them that good. Or maybe we will have to give that to the police station so that they will be delivering it to the true owner. We will be finding the true owner and we will be giving that person the same. This is a type of quasi contract. There is no formal contract, but it's imposed by law to ensure fairness and justice. One party benefits at the expense of another, even in absence of formal agreement. In that, they'll have to return back to the original party. If person receives goods by mistake and enjoys the benefit of those goods, then they may be required to pay for them under quasi-contract. Now, there's also another example wherein, for example, if we receive a good and then we start using the same without knowing that some other person has ordered the same. Now, it implicitly means that we will have to pay for the goods. E-contract, as the name suggests, e-contract are basically electronic contracts. Electronically through emails or online platforms. So basically within the framework of e-commerce like Amazon, Flipkart, etc. And it's recognized under law pertaining to digital transactions. Online purchase agreement made through website. Buyer clicks I agree after reviewing the TNCs constitutes a contract. For example, if you're ordering through Amazon or maybe Flipkart, or take for example Snapdeal or Myntra. So there's a box wherein it states I agree to TNCs and we click on agree. It means that we are agreeing to that digital transaction or e-commerce transaction that we are entering into. The next one being, so summary has been given to the express contract, implied, tacit, quasi and e-contract. So expressly stated, terms expressly stated in words or through, in words either written or oral. Implied contract, implied through actions or conduct. Tacit contract, silent contract. Quasi contract, no formal contract but it's imposed by legal construct, by law. E-contract is electronic contract. So up next we have types of contracts based on performance. It can be executed, executory, or executory. We have two categories, unilateral and bilateral. What do you mean by executed? Executed means, what do you mean by execute? To do. Executed contract means it's done. The contract is already done from both the parties. From both the sides, they have performed their obligations. That's meant by executed contract. Both the parties have completed their obligation. Consideration has been fully performed from both sides. So, like take for example, A pays B for 5,000 for service and B completes the service. Both the parties have fulfilled their parts of contract. Like take for example, in this case, A is entering into an agreement to sell goods worth 50,000. So in this case, A has delivered goods to B and B has made the payment of 50,000. Now this is an example of executed contract. So wherein A has delivered the goods and B has paid for the service. So wherein both the parties have fulfilled their part of obligation. Now what is A's obligation? For receiving the amount of 5,000, he has to give the goods. That is his obligation. B's obligation is that he will receive the goods and he has to pay 5,000, which is B's obligation. From both the parties' side, if they fulfill their respective obligations, then it's said to be an executed contract. Now, what do you mean by executory contract? As the name suggests, it's yet to be done. It can be unilateral or bilateral. So where one or both the parties are yet to fulfill their obligation. If one of the parties is yet to fulfill the obligation, then it's called unilateral. When both the parties are yet to perform their obligation, in that case it's referred to as bilateral. Mutual promises that remain outstanding, that is, their part of obligation is yet to be fulfilled. If, for example, if G agrees to tutor H starting next month for 1,000 per month, the contract is executed because he's already received that amount but is yet to provide service. So in that case, it's a executory contract. From one side, it has to be performed. The other party has paid the amount. Tutor has to teach. So it's unilateral executory contract. Unilateral, one-sided contract, with one party has performed the obligation, other party's obligation is still outstanding. For example, if A offers a reward for anyone who finds a lost dog and B finds the dog, A is obliged to pay the reward, but B has already completed the action of finding the dog. So in that case, he has found the dog. So his part of obligation is done. But the other party, they will have to pay, which is yet to be done. So it's a unilateral executory contract. What about bilateral executory contract? Now what about bilateral contracts? Bilateral contracts is one wherein both the parties have outstanding obligations. Like for example, if A agrees to sell car to B for 5 lakh and B agrees to pay that amount. Both the parties have mutual obligations that are yet to be fulfilled. That is, A will have to give the car and B will have to pay 5,000. From both the sides, if their obligation is pending, then this is called a bilateral contract. Types of contract. So we have executed, executory, and executory, unilateral and bilateral. The next is about proposal or offer. So what do you mean proposal or offer? When one person is signifying to another his willingness to do or abstain from doing something with a view to obtaining assent of the other, then he is said to make a proposal. Like for example, you may be asking some other person to buy the car, which is an act, or it can be an abstinence. Abstinence meaning to abstain, to prevent them from doing something. For example, you're already running a textile business and you do not want another to open a textile business within the radius of 10 kilometer from the place where your business is situated. In that case, you're making a payment of 10 lakh to prevent the other party from opening his business over there, which is an abstinence. So it can be an act or abstinence. So you're signifying your willingness, for example, to sell a car, or maybe for them not to do the business, to abstain from doing something. With for what? You're expressing the willingness to do something or to maybe not do something with the view to obtain their assent. Assent is basically their consent or approval. Then that is said to be an offer or proposal. So what are the essentials of a proposal or offer? First thing being parties involved. The person who's making the offer is called the promisor or offerer. The person who accepts the same, to whom the offer is made, is called offeree. And if he accepts the same, then it becomes promisee or acceptor. Like take for example, A is making an offer to B to sell his car worth 5 lakh. Now A is making an offer, it's called as offerer, and B, person to whom the offer is made, is called the offeree. And if it will be accepts the same, then he becomes acceptor or promisee, because once the proposal or offer is accepted, it becomes a promise. Expression of willingness. So offerer must clearly express his willingness to do something or to refrain from doing something, and there has to be an intention to obtain assent. So with the intent of obtaining assent, agreement of the offeree. So when you are making an offer, you are expressing the same with the view to obtaining the consent or assent of the other party. Types of acts. It can be positive as well as negative act. For example, in this case, it's a positive act, or it can be negative act as well. Classification of offer. Now offer can be general offer, specific offer, cross offer, counter offer, standing or continuing offer. So what do you mean by general offer? The name says general offer is something that's made to general public, to the public at large. For example, a reward for finding a lost pet. So somebody is advertising in a newspaper that the pet is lost, and anybody who finds the pet will be offered 1 lakh. So this is general offer, which is made to the public at large, general. Specific offer means it's specifically made to a particular individual or group. For example, a proposal to sell a specific item to a named person. Now if it's made specifically, for example, A is making an offer to B to the specific individual or group. In that case, it becomes a specific offer. And what do you mean by cross offer? Cross offer is something, for example, when two parties make an identical offer to each other simultaneously without them knowing, that they're making a cross offer. Like take for example, A plans to sell his car to B worth 5 lakh, and take for example, this car is a red car, and B is willing to purchase a car worth 5 lakh. He is also planning to buy a red car and with the same features that A has. So if at all A is making an offer to sell the car and B is making an offer to purchase the car, and with the same features, with the same price and everything coincidentally matching, in that case they are said to make a cross offer. So without them knowing initially that this person is going to sell and he is intending to buy the same, if they make identical offers, if two parties, if they are making identical offers unintentionally, then it's said to be a cross offer. Next is counter offer. What do you mean by counter offer? As the name suggests, there's an original offer and then you give a counter or maybe a response where you want the terms to be changed. That's called a counter offer. Let's take for example, A is offering to sell a bike for 10,000. B replies with an offer to buy it for 8,000. Example, counter offer is one wherein A is making an offer to sell his car for 1 lakh and B is willing to buy the car but at 80,000. So in this case what happens is B is placing a counter. So it's called a counter offer. So usually what happens in case of counter offer is original offer gets cancelled and the new counter offer will come into place. So what do you mean by this? For example, initially there was this offer to sell the car for 1 lakh. Now it's up to B whether to accept the same or not. After that, B is proposing an offer to purchase the same, to purchase a car for 80,000 only. This is a counter offer. So in this case, original offer gets cancelled and there's a counter offer. Now it's up to A whether to accept the same or not. If at all market price rises and if the car becomes 1,20,000, now B wishes to or intends to purchase this car for 1,00,000 and asks same. It's up to A whether to accept that or not, because again, original offer automatically gets cancelled once a counter offer is placed, and then the terms might be changed with the mutual consent of both the parties. Next is about standing or continuing offer. What do you mean by standing or continuing offer? As the name suggests, it continues for a period of time, allowing multiple acceptances. Like for example, a company offers a price list for a product valid for a month, like up to a month. Whenever you want, you can accept. That's a continuing offer. It continues until the end of the month. And what do you mean by general offer? So examination offer types, again, general offer is made to public at large, allowing anyone to accept it and perform the required act. Company advertised a £100 reward for anyone who contracted influenza after using their product as directed. Mrs. Carlyle used the product and contracted influenza, leading to claim the reward. So basically, anyone from the public can perform the act and can claim the reward. Here she was over here. Okay, let me go back to the PDF. Here, Mrs. Carlyle was entitled to reward as her actions constituted acceptance of the general offer. What about special or specific offer? It's one wherein it's directed to a particular individual or specific group. It can only be accepted by a specified person. That's called a special or specific offer. Because if A is offering to B, only B can accept the same. Or if A is offering to a particular group, to a specific group, then only they can accept the same, not others. So if A offers to sell his car to B at a specific price, this is specific offer where only B can accept and not others. Bolton versus Jones. In this case, a specific offer was made to a particular individual. It could only be accepted by that individual. For example, over here, saw that A is making an offer to B. Can C or D accept the same? Some unknown stranger or third party? No. Only B can accept the same. Cross offer. When two parties unknowingly exchange identical offers at the same point of time, that's called cross offer. There is no binding contract over here, as one party's offer cannot be construed as acceptance of the other's offer. But anyways, even if they are making cross offer, it does not mean that automatically a contract is come, or maybe that acceptance is done. No. In that case also, it's up to them whether to accept the same or not, or whether to proceed with the same as contract or to cancel that offer. Counter offer. Counter offer is one where offeree responds with modified terms, effectively rejecting the original offer. So over here, A's offerer is making an offer for sale of car worth 1 lakh. B is offeree. So offeree is asking for change in terms. He's asking for reduction in price. And this is an example of counter offer where an original offer gets rejected and a new offer, counter offer, will come into existence. Now it's up to A whether to accept the same or not. Key point. A counter offer changes the terms of original offer and constitutes a new offer that must be accepted by the original offer. It's also known as conditional acceptance, because now B, that is offeree, is willing to accept the same subject to certain conditions. Subject to what condition? Subject to reduction in price from 1 lakh to 80,000. So this is an example of conditional acceptance. Standing or continuing or open offer is some offer that will continue for a certain period of time. Invitation to tender for supply of goods are example of standing offer, as they remain open for acceptance until a certain deadline. Suppose you are inviting tender for supply of goods, then it will continue for a certain point of time. This is basically an example of standing offer. Now, what are the essentials of valid offer? Essentials of valid offer is that there has to be some legal relation. That is, offer must be capable of creating legal relation. Legal relation meaning there has to be legal enforceability. Social invitations generally do not create legal obligations. So, for example, we saw one example of social agreement is Mr. A and Mr. A's father. When he clears the exams, his father agrees to pay 50,000, but later on does not pay. It's not legally enforceable. Son cannot file a suit in court of law because it's a social agreement. Certainty and definiteness. So, already we saw that the meaning has to be certain. Like if at all there's an agreement to sell oil, then they will have to clearly specify what oil is, coconut oil or maybe sunflower oil or gingerly oil or whatever it may be. There should not be uncertainty of meaning. It must be clear and not vague. Unclear offer meaning it cannot lead to a contractual relationship. Communication. So if you make an offer without communicating it to the other party, how will the other party come through? So basically you have to communicate to the offeree That would be a valid offer. Without communication, there can be no acceptance. It is given in Lalman Shukla versus Gauri Dutt, wherein servant traced a missing boy without knowledge of reward announcement and was denied the reward. What do you mean by this? Now there was a general offer which was made, right? So in this case, a boy was missing, and then there was a reward notice in the advertisement that whoever finds a boy will get so and so reward. Now the servant of this particular house finds and traces his boy and finds the boy. Later comes to know that there was such advertisement, and then he claims a reward. Now the owners of the house, they refuse to give him the reward. Is it correct or incorrect? It's correct, because initially there was no communication of the offer only in the first place. So there can be no acceptance. General offer was made, but he was unaware of the same before tracing the boy. After tracing the boy, he came to know about the same. So there was no communication of the offer only, so there can be no acceptance. So he was denied the reward, which was correct. Intention to obtain assent. The offer must be made with some intention to obtain assent. Assent is basically approval or consent. So there has to be some approval or consent of the offeree rather than merely disclosing an intention. Conditional offers. The offers can be conditional also, meaning they can be made subject to specific terms. Like for example, you can make an offer for sale of car, and then you can make a condition as well. Like for example, subject to a condition that I will deliver it on the 10th day, or maybe you will have to pay me in installments, or whatever it may be. Offer can be conditional. Non-compliance cannot imply acceptance. An offer should contain terms when non-compliance, then should not contain terms when non-compliance equates to acceptance. Like take for example, if at all acceptance is not communicated, it cannot be taken as acceptance. Now if at all offer contains a term that without them communicating it will be treated as acceptance, then such a term should not be there. Basically, if at all a term is not complied, it should not be treated as acceptance. Specific, you can make specific or general offer. Specific offer is made to a particular individual or group. General offer is made to public at large. Express, it can be express. Offer that you're making is can be express or implied. Express is expressly stated, comes expressly stated in writing or oral. Implied offer is basically it's implied through the conduct of the parties, through action of the parties. Distinction from other communications. How can you distinguish or differentiate offer from other communications? See, there are three things. Statement of intention, invitation to offer is not an offer basically. What do you mean by statement of intention? Merely you are expressing an intention does not constitute an offer. What do you mean by this? Like take for example, if A is communicating to B, is making an offer to sell his car for 5 lakh. Now this is a valid offer, right? This is a valid offer. So take for example in another case wherein A is just communicating his intention, stating his intention to sell the car at 5 lakh. Now this definitely is not an offer, it's just a statement of intention. Can you distinguish between both? So here he is making an offer to B to sell the car. If it will be accepts the same, it becomes a promise. Here there's no offer made as such. Here it's a valid offer or proposal. So here if we see there's no offer in the first place. Here it's just a statement of intention, which is not an offer. So statement of intention definitely is not an offer, and invitation to offer is not an offer. So invitation to offer, for example, if at all you contracted a bid, so does not mean that automatically the bid will get settled to you. It just means that you are participating in the same. So if at all you get an invitation to bid or auction, it just means that you are getting an invitation to offer. And after that, you may be given the offer. Maybe take for example, if there's a government tender quotation, then if you quote the lowest price, then there's a chance that you will get the government contract. But invitation to offer does not mean that you get the offer only. That is, if you accept, then it does not become a contract, because there may be some other players in the market as well who will be giving the government those quotes. You'll be one among them. So wherein if the government is asking you for the tender, for the quote, it just means that it's an invitation to offer and it's not an offer. So plaintiffs asked if the defendants would sell a property and they quoted a price, which court ruled it was merely an invitation to negotiate, not an offer. So just because you're quoting a price does not mean that you are agreeing to sell at that price only. Does not mean that it's an offer. It's just an invitation to offer. Statement of price. Statement of intention is not an offer. Invitation to offer is not an offer. Statement of price is not an offer. Quoting a price is not an offer. Example, stating the lowest price at which a property might be sold does not create a binding contract. Like take for example this, one party A and the other party B. So B is asking for quotation of prices from A, who is a supplier, and then after getting the quotation, they are quoting that it's 23, 25 per unit, 50 per unit, 45 per unit, depending on the range and quality of products, and then is asking for lowest price, and then for which A is replying that lowest price is 23. Now B is accepting the, okay fine, lowest price is 23. Now you supplying the goods at 23. A is not accepting to the same. Now this is completely valid because this is just quotation of price and is not a contract. Just because you quote a particular price does not mean that automatically you enter into a contract just because the other party accepts the same. You're not bound by the same. So there are three types of agreements which are not contract basically. One is quotation of price, not an agreement though, but then these are not offers. It's not an offer in the first place. Statement of intention and invitation to offer is not an offer. So these three are definitely not offers. Key distinction. So what are the distinctions between offer and invitation to offer? Offer is final expression of willingness to be bound by specific terms upon acceptance. You're expressing something, once other party accepts, you are bound by the contract. So invitation to offer is just a preliminary step that invites others to make offer. Like in case of bid or auction, you're invited to participate in the bid or maybe to quote the prices in tender. Does not mean that automatically once they accept it becomes a contract. No. So it's just a step that is precedent, that is previous to offer, and it invites others to make offer. Acceptance of an invitation does not lead to a contract, whereas acceptance of an offer becomes a promise and becomes a contract. So what are the examples of invitation to offer? Company prospectus, wherein they are inviting public to subscribe for shares, or goods displayed for sale in shop window, auction sales or price quotations. These are examples of invitation to offer and not an offer. So then we have the difference between offer and invitation to offer. Offer is governed by section 2A of the Act. It is a final expression of willingness and will be bound by the offer once other party accepts it. Whereas invitation to offer is just they are inviting to make offer, but does not mean that once they accept it becomes a contract. So where a party without expressing his final willingness proposes certain terms on which he is willing to negotiate only, does not make an offer but only invites the other party to make an offer on those terms. Intention of parties. Here the intention is to be bound as soon as the other party accepts it when he is making an offer. Here the intention is just to negotiate the terms, not to be bound by it. Sequence. So offer cannot be an act precedent to invitation to offer. Invitation to offer is always, so first comes the invitation to offer, and then next step would be offer. Once both the parties give their mutual consent, the next step is offer, and then is acceptance plus consideration, and then it becomes an agreement. Okay, the next one being offer can be made by act, by abstinence, by words. See, offer can be made through act or offer can be made by act or abstinence. To do something, or maybe to prevent the party from doing something, to abstain from doing something, abstinence. An act can be through words or conduct. Words expressly through written or oral, or can be through conduct, action of the parties, implied. Acceptance. So, what do you mean by acceptance? Acceptance is generally when the person to whom the proposal is made signifies his assent. That is consent to the proposal. For example, A is making an offer to B and B accepts the same. That is acceptance. When he is signifying his consent, assent to the proposal or offer being made. Once it is accepted, it becomes a promise, because we know promise means offer or proposal. When accepted, it becomes a promise. Offer or proposal plus acceptance is equal to promise. Analysis of acceptance. Then next is analysis of acceptance. So acceptance has to come from the person to whom the offer was made. For example, if A offers to sell car to B, then only B can accept the offer. So we saw that in case of specific offer, it has to be accepted only by the person to whom the offer is made, with the specific individual or the group. Signification of consent. So acceptance is signified when the offeree communicates agreement to the proposal. So when is acceptance done? Once you communicate that acceptance to the person who has made the offer. Transformation into promise. Once acceptance is communicated, the proposal turns into a promise, because we already know that offer or proposal plus acceptance will automatically turn into a promise. Relationship between offer and acceptance. So acceptance is crucial. The thing is, once the offer is accepted, it becomes a binding promise between both the parties. If one of them does not fulfill the obligation, the other one can move to court of law. So one party is bound by the other one is bound by the first one. So William Manson has put that words as acceptance to a match igniting powder. The offer is inert until acceptance match activates it. That is, acceptance to offer is what a match is to a gun of lighting powder. So once you strike a match to a gunpowder, then it automatically explodes. So such is the importance of the offer and acceptance. Now offer here is that gunpowder. If at all you strike a match over there, then it will explode. So once it is done, once acceptance is done, after that it cannot be revoked. Offer cannot be revoked. As long as it's gunpowder, you can revoke the offer. But once the gunpowder is stricken by the match, then it will ignite and explode. So after that, you will not be able to revoke the offer. So when can you revoke the offer? You can revoke the offer as long as there's no acceptance. As long as acceptance is not received. And what are the legal rules regarding valid acceptance? There are some rules regarding valid acceptance. So number one is, acceptance has to come from the person to whom the offer is made, not from other persons. So it has to come only from the person to whom the offer is made. For instance, Bolton vs. Jones. Bolton supplied goods based on order meant for Brocklehurst, and since offer was not made to him, no contract was established. So in this case, Bolton, the order was for Brocklehurst. So who should supply for the order? Brocklehurst. But instead, Bolton supplied for the order. So later on, the person who was purchased the goods did not pay to Bolton because he says that offer was for Brocklehurst. So he should have accepted, and he should have accepted the offer, and he should have supplied the goods. So then in that case I would have paid. But since you have supplied, wherein there was no offer in the first place, so I will not pay you for the same. So in which case there was no contract, and then the other person was right. Bolton was not paid for the contract. And acceptance will have to be absolute and unqualified. Unqualified meaning without any condition. So it has to be unconditional. See, offers can be conditional. Like for example, you were offering subject to certain conditions, but the other party, when they are accepting, they will have to accept without any conditions for that to be a contract. Because if at all they are intending to make any changes to the terms of contract, then in that case there will be a counter offer where original offer will automatically get rejected. So generally acceptance will have to be unconditional. So here Neil versus Merit, wherein a party's conditional acceptance, part payment in monthly installments, was held invalid as it did not match original offer. So here it's an example of counter offer. Communication of acceptance. Acceptance must be communicated to the offerer. In Rodgen versus Metropolitan Railway Company, managers' uncommunicated approval did not create a contract. Similarly, in Bhagwan Das versus Girdharilal, an acceptance without knowledge of offer was not valid. See, generally offer as well as acceptance, you will have to communicate to the other party. Without communication, it's not valid. Right. So for example, if you're making an offer, you have to communicate to the other party. Then only then the other party will know, and then he or she can accept the same. Then it becomes a contract. Without communication of offer, there cannot be valid acceptance. Similarly, acceptance will have to be communicated. Without communicating, there will not be a valid acceptance. Prescribed mode of acceptance. If at all offer is prescribing you the mode of acceptance, like for example, you have to accept only through mail, or maybe through post, or through text message, in that case, you will have to accept only through that mode only. If you are accepting otherwise, and if the offer does not object, then it's valid, otherwise it's invalid. For example, it's mentioned in the offer that you have to accept only through mail, but you are accepting through text message, in which case it's invalid. But if at all the person who is making the offerer does not object, is completely okay with it, in that case, then in that case offer will be still valid, the contract will be still valid. Timeliness. Generally, acceptance will have to be done within a stipulated time frame, or if not, within a reasonable time. Reasonable time varies by context, and it's generally not strictly defined. Silence is not acceptance. Mere silence can never be an acceptance. For example, in Feldhaus vs. Bindley, nephew's silence did not constitute acceptance of the horse offer. Acceptance by conduct. Acceptance by conduct is one wherein you fulfill certain conditions of reciprocal promise, and that signifies acceptance. For example, in certain cases, like for example, a person is delivering you the goods and you start using it it automatically means that you've accepted the purchase and you've accepted the goods that have been sold by the other person, and then you will make the payment for the same. Like for example, you enter into a restaurant, you order food, it automatically implies that you're going to pay for the same. So only offer you can accept. It's absolute and unqualified. Communication of acceptance, prescribed mode, timeliness, silence is not acceptance, and acceptance by conduct. And next we have communication of offer and acceptance. Next is about communication of offer and acceptance. Effective communication is very important when it comes to acceptance as well as offer, so that you can prevent misunderstanding and also the possibility of revocation. Communication of offer. So when is offer communication complete? So when it comes to the knowledge of the person to whom you are making the offer. So A is offering B and B comes to know about the same. Then the offer is said to be communicated. When it comes to the knowledge of offering, communication to offer is completed. Communication of offer is completed. If A offers to sell his house to B via post, he's communicating through post, offer is communicated, then B receives a letter. B receives a letter on March 12 but only reads it on March 15. Now when does B come to know about the offer? The offering only on 15th March. So therefore, communication of offer is completed only on 15th March. Communication of acceptance. The two things that we will have to consider when it comes to acceptance is mode of acceptance. One is by act, by omission. Certain cases you might express your acceptance through act, through written or oral communications, just letter, email, phone call, conduct, etc. By omission, mere silence generally does not count as acceptance. Seller delivers goods to buyer, this act can be seen as an acceptance of offer. So next is about effectiveness of communication. So similar to that of offer, acceptance must also be effectively communicated to the offerer. If offerer thinks they have accepted in their mind but fails to communicate it, then whether it's valid acceptance? No. For example, in Central Bank Yotamol versus Venkatesh, a bank's internal resolution to sell land to A was not communicated to him, so no contract existed. Completion of communication of acceptance. So completion of communication of acceptance can be divided into two categories. One is against the proposer, the person who's making the offer. It is said to be communicated once it is out of acceptor's control. Against the offerer, it is said to be acceptance is said to be communicated once it is out of acceptor's control, meaning once the acceptor has posted or maybe has given his acceptance, it is automatically out of the acceptor's control. It is said to be accepted. Against the acceptor, it is said to be accepted when it comes to the proposer's knowledge. Take for example, A is offering to sell his car for 5 lakh and prescribed mode is through post, and B has posted his acceptance on, take for example, 12th March, and A has received the post on 15th March and reads the same on 15th March. So in this case, against the offerer, against the person who is making the offer, when is the acceptance said to be communicated? Once it is out of control of the B to revoke the same, that is on 12th March, it is said to be communicated. Acceptance is done from the viewpoint of A. As against offeree, that is B, when is the acceptance said to be communicated? Only when it comes to the knowledge of offerer, that is 15th March. Acceptance to, for example, B accepts A's offer and posts acceptance on 14 March, it is complete for A, that is for the offerer, once it is out of the acceptor's control, but only complete for B when A receives it. But complete for the proposer, from the proposer's point of view, acceptance is said to be completed only when it comes to the knowledge of offerer. Acceptance through instantaneous, when there's instantaneous communication, immediate. When there's immediate communication, there's no problem at all. There's no misunderstanding or confusion as such, like telephone or fax or mail. Acceptance is only complete when it's received by the offerer. The contract was deemed valid only when the acceptance was received. Communication of, so for example, if you communicate on the phone and the other party gets to know about the same, then it's done. Same is the case with fax, mail and others. Communication of special conditions. This is communication of special conditions. Sometimes a contract might contain special conditions that may not be explicitly communicated. Passengers, for example, may be deemed to accept conditions printed on tickets even if they did not read them. Mukul Datta versus Indian Airlines. Sometimes you implicitly accept the terms and conditions. For example, if you're buying a railway ticket and if there are certain terms and conditions that are printed over there, you might have clicked on agree. I agree on terms and conditions. Even if you don't go through every terms and condition in detailed manner, still you deem to, still it's assumed that you accept all the terms and conditions over here. And case law in Lily White versus Manusamy, a dry cleaner included a condition limiting liability for lost items on a receipt. Court ruled the condition was unreasonable and customer can claim the full value of the lost item. So if you put your clothes for laundry or dry cleaner maybe, in that case there's a receipt. But if there's any unreasonable terms and condition, then court can make sure that it's deemed void and that the entire amount is paid. Like for example, this is a special term and condition in the laundry or dry cleaner receipt wherein it's mentioned that if at all a particular cloth is damaged or destroyed, then they're limiting liability for lost items. What do they mean by this? For example, a cloth worth 5,000 is lost. As per the receipt, only 50% will be paid. So only 2,500 will be paid. Now this is completely unreasonable because it's their responsibility to ensure that they properly take care of the clothes. So in this case, if they've lost items, then they will have to pay the entire amount, full value of the lost item. So court ruled that this is completely unreasonable. They're paying 50% of the amount and has ruled that this particular dry cleaner, if at all they lose the clothes, will have to pay full amount to the customer. So next is about the standard forms of contract. Standard form of contract may be enforced even if the acceptor is unaware of specific terms, provided reasonable notice is given. Like for example, a transport company attempted to limit liability after accepting goods without prior notice of conditions, leading the court to rule that limitation was not binding. If at all is a standard form of contract, the reasonable notice will have to be given. Only then it is applicable. Otherwise, it's not. Here, a transport company attempted to limit liability after accepting goods, but without any notice. In that case, it's not binding. Communication of performance. Communication of performance as acceptance is deemed to be complete from the proposer's point of view. Same thing. Once it is out of the acceptor's control, same as that of acceptance. From acceptor's point of view, once it comes to the knowledge of proposer. Certain cases, simply performing an act is not enough. Acceptor must communicate their performance unless the offer explicitly states that the performance alone constitutes acceptance. Because in certain cases, like if you perform, that does not mean that you've accepted. You have to perform and then you'll have to still communicate your acceptance. Like in case of Carlyle versus Carbolic Smoke Ball, you have to use the product as well as you have to communicate to the company. Only then it's deemed as acceptance, and then the other party will be bound and they will be paying the amount. So key principles: offer must contain definite promise made to specific individual or to public. If it's in the form of promise and written for an act, performance of that act without further communication constitutes acceptance. Revocation of offer and acceptance. So when can the offer be revoked? Before the acceptance is done, offer can be revoked. So communication or revocation when it's said to be complete. Again, see, as far as the offeror is concerned, it's said to be communicated once the revocation is sent. Again, the offeree only when it comes to the offeree's knowledge. Like for example, if he cancels this on 15th March and he receives the mail only on mail or maybe post only on 18th March, then on 15th March, once the revocation is sent, it's said to be complete against the offerer. Against the offeree, only when it comes to knowledge of offeree, the revocation communication is said to be complete. The revocation of offer. Offer can be revoked any time before it's accepted. As we saw regarding this gunpowder, once the match is ignited, nothing can be done. But before that, you can still revoke the offer. So offer can be revoked before acceptance is done. Proposal, that is, offer can be revoked any time before acceptance is communicated. Acceptance can be revoked before the communication of acceptance is complete against acceptor. So when can you revoke the acceptance? As against the acceptor, when it's said to be complete. When the communication of acceptance is complete, it's said to be complete only when it comes to the knowledge of offeree. So before it reaches the knowledge of offeree, you can revoke your acceptance. When it comes to offer, you can revoke the same before acceptance. In English law, acceptance becomes irrevocable only once it is expressed. Whereas under Indian law, it can still be revoked before it reaches offerer. Before it comes to the knowledge of offerer, you can still revoke the acceptance. Whereas in English law, once you post the same, you will not be able to revoke. In Indian laws, you posted before it reaches the offerer, you can still revoke the same. Revocation in various scenarios. Telephone contract. So telephone contract, usually there will be no problem, but if at all the call drops, then again the acceptor will have to call and communicate their acceptance clearly. Modes of revocation of offer. So how can you revoke the offer? Offer can be revoked by notice, by lapse of time, by notice. You can give a notice and you can revoke. Revoke meaning you can cancel the offer. So when can you cancel the offer? Revocation of offer only before acceptance. By notice, by lapse of time. So once you give an offer and you are stating that if you want, you can accept this within 10 days. Within a specified period of time or a reasonable period of time, it's not accepted. Then automatically the offer lapses. Non-fulfillment of conditions. If conditions are not met, automatically the offer is revoked. By death or insanity. If at all, offerer becomes insane or has died, then automatically the offer will be revoked by counter offer. Counter offer will automatically reject the original offer is what we saw earlier. So original offer will be cancelled and new counter offer will come into effect. Non-acceptance according to prescribed mode. If at all acceptance is to be done only through mail or through post, but you do it through some other mode, then automatically the offer gets revoked. Subsequent illegality. If at all something is subsequently something illegal is involved, then obviously the offer gets revoked. Thank you. And this chapter is a very, very simple chapter. All that you can do is you can go through this, you can watch this at 1x or 1.5x speed according to your convenience, and then you can self-study, because again self-study can never be replaced by videos or revisions, but again you will get conceptual clarities through videos, but you will have to self-study and then you will have to revise. So regarding the self-study and the timetable plan, we will see in the upcoming videos. Thank you.